The goal of this demo is to use ES6 JavaScript to load content that we have externally loaded, or hosted rather, in a JSON file into our inner HTML of our document. This is our starting point. I have a title and a button and a background image. So all of that information is inside of my HTML, which, as you can see, there's not a lot of it, and my CSS, which again there's not a whole lot of it, it's just styles that I've applied to what's already there, and also the content that we're going to add. So this is our starting point, but this is where I want us to be at the end of this demo. 3 different articles loaded with different pictures, titles, and descriptions, all externally hosted on this JSON file that I've put inside of my github.io. So let's get started by first looking at what we have to create and then create some dummy text for that. So the first step will be to use Ajax to load the JSON file. So that's our first step. After we have that done, we have to save the JSON data locally. Then after that's done, we are going to insert the HTML articles using the insert adjacent HTML function in JavaScript. So into section, insert adjacent HTML. So that's what we'll use. And last but not least, we need to call Ajax at the very end, not question mark, call Ajax, and then also close it. So let's actually do the request first, and then we'll also call Ajax because we have to establish the path to that. So for the request, very simply, we'll open up a variable that we can name whatever we want. So in this case, I'll do XHR for a new XML request or HTTP request. So that's going to end with quotes, parentheses, and a semicolon. And it's not a request, it's a request. So get rid of the S there. Now XHR needs to unload all of that data. So we're going to use an unload function. And all functions always have parentheses, so we can pass a couple of parameters inside of it. And then that unload function, I want it to host all of the changes that I'm going to make. So that's what's creating the connection to the request. But I need to parse that data. So I'm going to save that JSON data locally so I can parse it. So for that, I'll create a new variable labeled data equals JSON, all caps, parse, and then I'm going to XHR dot response text, camel case, and always ending with a semicolon. So if I save this, of course nothing will happen, nothing will be updated here because I'm just creating variables and connections to the JSON file. Now right here at the end, I want us to create the path to that connection. So in other words, to this place, I'll just copy that. And also make sure that nothing is being sent out. So XHR, name of my variable, I'll open, and then I need to get, comma, the path to that file, comma true. So in the path, I can't forget the https :/ and then that path that I copy. So alecamposd.github.io sharkdata.json. So once again, I'll save this, refresh, nothing will actually happen because I haven't inserted any HTML or told it where to pull it to. And one more step I need to do here before I do that is make sure that nothing is being sent out. So I'll do xhr.send, and without the need of single quotes, I'll do null in there because it's a preferred term in JavaScript. So I have my setup ready for me to start adding content to my page. So that's the very next step. Get rid of some of this space here. And I'm going to insert my HTML. It's the first thing I need to do. Just cleaning out my tabbing and my spacing a bit so it makes more sense. Alright, so to insert my HTML, I need to do a couple things first. I need to first create a variable that will store a target, or rather that would look to a target where I'm going to inject all of this HTML. So for that, I'll create var location section equals document. Query selector is what's going to allow us to look at a tag in the HTML, which in this case I have this guy with the ID of location. So a section with the ID of location. Query selector, I need a pound because it's an ID, and then the name that I just copied, ended with a semicolon. So again, nothing will happen here because I'm just creating my variables and my paths. I haven't used add a JSON HTML. I haven't even linked to the JSON file parameters yet. So that's what we'll do right now. I want to wrap this up in an if statement because I don't want anything to happen here unless local sections is found. So if the section with the ID of locations is found, go ahead and run this code. Alright, so we'll save, and the first step inside of there is to create a variable that's empty. So for that, we'll label var locations with an S at the end equals nothing, because we want it to start empty, and then little by little we'll add to it. Now the next thing we need to do is create a for loop. Now this for loop is what's going to make it easier for us to go through that JSON file and pull each image to a different location, pull each title to a different location one by one. So as you guys now know, first step for loop is for, and then the variable that you want to name it. In this case, I'm going to use I equals 0. So the equals 0 is going to be my starting point, and the I is going to be my iterator. So what counts, what keeps counting. So I want my iterator to count upwards using data.locations.length, and I want it to increment by 1. So if you look at locations.length, data is this JSON file that we're parsing, and we have locations right here. And the length is just how many items there are, so 3 in this case. So now my for loop has the parentheses, but I'm missing my curly brackets here. And the next thing I need to do is tell it where to go. So where am I injecting this stuff? Where am I putting this content? Well, I'm going to put it right here in local sections, which I've already established a variable to it. Let me make sure it's right. And I need a query selector to say, okay, what's my target going to be? Where am I going to inject this content after? And we're going to use the function insert adjacent HTML for that. Now we need to tell it where to do this. I'll do after end for that, and then we need a comma and the name of our variable. Locations always ended with a semicolon. Again, nothing will change right now because although I've made my connection and I've looped through my JSON file, I'm not necessarily parsing anything just yet. So where my var locations began empty, right after the loop opens, I'll do a tab here so we know it's inside, locations plus equals article. So we're using the article tag in this case, and I'll do a quick check, locations plus or equals, close the article tag. So if I did this correctly and I had a semicolon at the end of my line and I refresh my page, we now see three white sections, three boxes rather, and I'll inspect that in the browser physically so we can see, and you'll see that there are my article tags. There's one, there's the other one, and there's the other one. But if I look at my HTML, well, they're not in there because they're being added through the JavaScript. So we're doing well here. We're seeing content popping up on the screen, and that was just a little test to see. Of course, these article tags are being styled white because I already have an article rule here in my CSS telling it to have a background of white, overflow hidden, so I've already built those things. So that's why they're showing up in there. The next step will be, if I can pull up my screenshot, to start retrieving all of the information that goes into each of the sections. So the image, the title, location, description, etc. So let's start with the image for the very first thing. I recommend that you always wrap images into p tags for layout purposes. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to practice what I preach. And I'm going to create a p tag that is nesting an image tag inside. I've already created CSS for this, so I want to use that styling. Thumbnail. And I want to close that right here. So that's the opening of my p tag and the class. Now what I want to add right after that is the opening to the image tag, and the path to the image tag, or the source, as the attribute is called, is going to be a concatenation of parameters here pulling from this image location right here. So the very first thing we need to do in the source there is I'm now going to add a single quote so that I can start concatenating there, plus data dot locations, which is the name of my variable there and my object, rather, my iterator, and dot image because I'm pulling this particular line here, right? So locations right here, image, locations dot image, and then I need one more thing. Every image to be semantically correct, or every image tag rather, needs an alt tag. So I need a single quote here and a double quote for the alt, and then I need an equal sign, and we'll leave that. We'll actually use a concatenation to have that pop up on the screen. So we have the alt be just like the path to the file. It's going to be a concatenation, so source data dot locations, the iterator that we used before to keep track of which item we're counting right now, and now we have location plus, because I'm not done closing my image tag here, single quote for the closing, and then double quote for the closing of the tag, and then the closing of the tag itself. Now I have to close my paragraph tag that opens here, /p, and now a single quote at the very end. So if I did that correctly and I refresh the page, now you see each article is pulling a different image, and they're being pulled because of this loop. Of course, it's looping through this object and going through each image parameter and pulling that source. So the next thing we need to do to make it look like this is the title and the location. So let's do those. Once again, locations plus equals because we're concatenating, we're adding to this. Now we're going to do h3 because it's a large bold title and I already have classes for those styles in my CSS. Now I want to add to that data.locations, just like I did before, the iterator to keep track of which number I'm in right now, description plus the closing of the tag. Closing of the p tag, always with a semicolon at the end. And actually that's not a p tag, that's an h3. So data.locations.description actually should be location. Right, data.location, I save that. Let's check to see if I made any errors. So there they are, Shipwreck Cove, Shark Sanctuary, and Turtle Migration. You can see that those are the locations here. So I'm pulling first one, second one, and third one. So all is well so far. Let's keep working. Let's keep making this more awesome by adding the actual location with an icon and a description. So those are the next steps. Let's keep concatenating here. Location plus equals. And in this case, we're going to use a smaller tag than the h3, so we'll use an h4. And I already have a class for this one in my CSS, so I'm going to use the class of location. And I need to concatenate a little bit more into this because I need the actual place to be pulled from that JSON file. So data.location, locations with an S, my iterator, dot, and now I'm looking for a location. And then I also need the iterator for the city. So dot city, which if I remember correctly, there we go. So location and city. So I have data.locations, iterator, dot city, and now I need I'm missing an S right here. Actually, this needs to be data locations city only because that's with the iterator, of course. So data.locations iterator dot city. There we go. And then we need the rest of that tag, which is going to be, we need a comma to separate the city from the state. So for that, we'll just do plus and an empty quote with a comma and a space inside of it, so we can separate the state from the city. And then we need to keep concatenating just a little bit more. Oops. Of content, because now we need the state. So just like we did here, data.locations, the iterator I.state. And last but not least, we need to close this tag. Always ending in a semicolon. So this was an H4. Oh, and I'm missing an S right here. Locations. And I'm not setting it, I'm updating it. So save. Let's make sure this is right. So now we have it. For Lauderdale, it added the comma and the space and then the state. Same for Miami, same for Daytona. So next step we have is the description and the rating and a couple other things down there. So for that, probably going to use a paragraph tag. It will be the simplest of all. So locations plus equals, open our tag, So I need a paragraph tag for this. No use in giving this guy a class or anything like that, just a straightforward paragraph tag. I haven't created anything like that. Locations, the iterator, just like I've been using this entire time. And in this case, I'm looking for what? Pretty self-explanatory actually, description. So description, dot description, and now I need to close the tag. So plus, quotes, opening and closing the tag, and always ended by a semicolon. So let's save this. Let's make sure we didn't make any errors by refreshing. There it is. Description is loaded. So then we have the rating and the depth and the temperature and all those parameters there at the bottom. So let's do those now. We're going to use an HTML5 tag known as the meter tag for this one. So locations plus equals to updated. As always, we're going to wrap that up in a p tag so it's semantically correct and it loads on the page correctly. So I have my p tag. I'll just close it right away so I don't forget and add my semicolon at the end of the line there. Now what I need to do is open my meter tag and establish the attributes, the min and max attributes. So min equals, with double quotes, I'll start that up at 0, and max equals, again with double quotes, 5. Now the initial value for this is going to be empty. So just a quote, because we're going to concatenate the value for what each of them are going to be. So we need a double quote because we're writing inside of it, and then a single quote to start concatenating the path to it. So plus, just like we've done before, data dot locations, the iterator that we've been using this entire time, dot rating. Now we need a little bit more than that because that's in the opening of the tag. So we need to add a plus and close that tag with a single quote, then double quote because we're closing this value right here, and then after double quote, closing the tag. So that's opening and closing the tag and adding the value inside of it. But now what I need to do is keep adding the rest of the content inside of that tag. So after the tag closes, I need another plus here, data dot locations. Once again, the iterator to keep track of which item we're doing right now, and I need a rating. Plus, once again, so now I can actually have text on the screen out of 5 to give the user an indicator what this is doing, and lastly, the closing of the meter tag. Now we're going to turn this into a link by adding an anchor tag that has an href pointing to something pretty trivial. You could add a pound or anything like that for now. So we need double quotes for the value. We'll do / rate for now, and then outside of that we need to close and then rate it so that the user knows what we are telling them to do. So then we got to close that tag and close the p tag. Alright, always ending of course in a semicolon. So if I did that correctly and I save, now we have the styles appearing. So the first one has a 4 stars, 3 stars, 5 stars. Now we're doing well here. A couple more things that we need to do is, let's see, so we need to pull these 3 items at the bottom of those sections, and for that I'm going to use the definition list, definition titles, and because that indents the content a little bit more appropriately. So right after our rating there, I'm going to open locations plus equals, just like before, a DL tag, definition list. And it's going to open here, and just like every other time, I'm going to close it at the end. Locations plus equals, quotes, opening, close, DL. Boom, done. Simple and easy. So now I should have DLs at the bottom of these sections, and I can start building the content that goes inside of those DLs. So locations, let me do an actual indent here, locations plus equals, and I'm going to do the very first one, which is the average temperature, and just do average depth rather, just to make sure I'm looking at the right thing. So I got depth here. So locations plus equals, the first thing inside of a DL is a DT, a definition title, and I'm going to label that title average depth. Now I need to close the tag. And don't forget a semicolon at the end. So if I did that correctly, and I refresh my page, oh, might have messed something up. Let's see what we did. So locations, DL, so that's just the title. Got it. So I need to pull in an actual definition underneath that title. So locations plus equals, and now I need a DD definition. We'll just go ahead and close it right away so we don't forget. And inside of that DD is the actual depth, which is going to be in meters. So that's why I'm going to write an M here at the end of that string. So it adds an M to the end of the meters. And at the very beginning, we need a plus sign. Well, actually, right after that quote, need a plus sign, data dot locations, just like we've been doing this entire time, then the iterator, and then what I copied, which was the depth. Then we need a plus sign and another quote, single quote right here, so it adds that M as part of the string and always ending everything in a semicolon. So now if I did that correctly, you'll see that it added the different depths for each of them because they're being pulled from the depth here. So 45, 80, 52, or 39 rather, 45, 39, 50. And it's adding the M at the very end of that string like I added. So a couple more that we need to add are the temperature and the lessons, so the dates for the lessons. Could very easily copy these two lines of text right here because we're doing the exact same thing. Just adding one more title and one more definition. And all I'm going to do is change this to average temperature. And then right here, I need to change this to temperature. And of course, the designator here so the user knows what unit that is. So before we check this out, let's do the last one because we're simply just copying and pasting. There should be no problems here. And let's do the very last one, which was the lessons. We'll give the title dive lessons, and instead of temperature we are pulling lessons. And then let's delete this because they're dates. So if I did that correctly and I save and I refresh, you can see that each item is pulling different locations. And don't worry too much that this one is being bolded to the end. That's just because I'm constraining my screens to a smaller size and the CSS is not being responsive. But that's about it. So we started with absolutely nothing on our page, and we ended up with this.